And on behalf of the Archdiocese of San Francisco, welcome to Mosaic. You'll be watching this program shortly after Easter. Now, Easter is a feast that many people enjoy, whether they observe it in a religious way or not. We have Easter eggs, Easter candies, Easter baskets, Easter bunnies, Easter bonnets, in Easter parades. At Easter, spring has sprung, the world is green, the season is bright. But of course, at the heart of Easter is a deep and dark drama with a glorious ending. First is the condemnation and execution of Jesus of Nazareth, and then his resurrection from the dead. Now, these are central Christian teachings and have been so from the beginning. But what are we to think of the resurrection? Why do we believe in it? Is it difficult to come to that belief? And what is it like to live in that belief? Now, here with us today to discuss the resurrection is a scholar, teacher, and priest, Father John Boettcher. After this brief break, please rejoin Father Boettcher and me to delve more deeply into the resurrection of Christ. Hello and welcome to Mosaic. With me here today is Father John Boettcher. B-O-T-T-C-H-E-R. I just learned how to pronounce it. Father Boettcher, thank you for joining us. Now, Father Boettcher has a fantastic resume. You have more abbreviations after your name than most people. I'm going to tell what they are. He's not only a biblicist, that is to say a scholar of the Bible, but a physicist, and first a physicist and experimental scientist. So what I'm seeing here, Father, is a B.A. in physics from UC Berkeley, an MDiv for the Franciscan School of Theology, an MA in Biblical Studies from the Graduate Theological Union, and then a Licentiate of Sacred Theology from the Pontifical University in Rome, and a Doctor of Sacred Theology from the same institution.
Yeah.
And you began, it says here, with a BA in Physics at Cal, and then worked in the semiconductor industry in Palo Alto. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the time when you experienced a conversion to Catholicism. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, actually it started in the last year of my studies at Berkeley.
Okay.
And I studied physics there with an idea towards applied physics, working in semiconductors and that sort of thing. And so I'd had statistics classes and so on about the interpretation of data, and I went on this one hitchhiking trip, and in 6 years, I had been raised Catholic, and then I just drifted off in high school. So 6 years later, I went out hitchhiking out of Berkeley, like I did for recreation, you know, just put out my thumb and go.
It's happened in my past, too.
3 people on that brief hitchhiking trip all talked to me about Jesus Christ. And I believe there's a God out there somewhere, maybe more like the Force, you know, like kind of the Buddhist cosmic force. But I thought in my mind, like, this is statistically significant. Like, nobody in 6 years, and then in 24 hours, 3. So I thought, I better, like, go back over this. There may be something in this for me. So I went back and sort of out of curiosity read the Bible and looked for this person, first person who talked about John, the apostle, had written these things. He was talking about the apocalypse, but I didn't connect that except through John, and then I started reading the Gospel of John. And it started out with a kind of poetic introduction. Right? In the beginning was the Word, and Word's with God, and God was the Word. And I thought, this is just like the Tao Te Ching, the Eastern poetry that I've been reading about the cosmos. So I just got absorbed in the story, and then that just drew me into this person of Christ that I never really encountered personally before, you know, like just to read it for my own inspiration. So that sunk in and carried through into after graduation. I just came to conviction, this is a person unique in human history. Yeah. And
so relation with Jesus and also with the church, you went back to Catholic liturgies at that point, or?
Yeah, after about 3-4 months of just reading the Bible 2, 3, 4 times a day and praying, I just felt God saying, go back to church. And I said, which one? Because I wasn't necessarily attached to the Catholic Church at that point.
Yeah.
And he brought me back to remember the exact morning I'd left in Saratoga, California, Sacred Heart Parish. I just looked around and I said, I'm not experiencing God here. I'll be back when I do. And he says, remember what you said? And I go, yes. I had a very good memory. I still do. And so I said, okay. So I went to the nearest church, which was the Newman Center in Berkeley.
And it drew you back not only into practicing Catholicism and reading your Bible, but apparently to a vocation to the priesthood.
Yeah, that was some years downstream
Okay,
in the
sure.
research lab. Ironically, where people say the scientists, are very slow to believe in God, I was in a research lab in Palo Alto where among around 60 employees in our central research department and there was 2 Bible studies weekly.
Really?
And apparently there had been a young man before me that had become a Catholic priest. And 3 of my friends from there actually became full-time Christian missionaries. So it was a hotbed for Christian calling and ministry.
And these gentlemen are all out of the semiconductor industry of
Yeah, research, scientific environment, yeah.
So you found your way into religion and priesthood. And your priesthood seems to be both a scholarly one and a pastoral one, as I understand.
Right.
Can you tell us what you do?
At present, I'm working at the Sonoma State Newman Center in Cotati, Pen Grove, mailing address, California, and also working and teaching in the seminary. I teach courses on the Gospels, John, and another course on Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
Okay. And this Newman Center, for those viewers who don't know, it's a Catholic chaplaincy at a university, or
Right.
Your university. So it's Sonoma State University. So you're acquainted with the ancient texts, you're acquainted with today's young people, and you have some theological, literary, and scientific knowledge with which you're equipped. And we've got you here today to talk about the resurrection. So was the resurrection a key part of your interest, your renewed interest in Catholicism at the time?
Yeah, it became that. I'd say first before that was the passion, like the passion of Christ, the sufferings, the event of his dying, the way he went through that. There was a major impact that came when I was reading the Gospel of John, and I came to the way of the cross. When he had his cross, John says, taking his own cross, he went out from there. And I saw this view of Christ with just bloody, with this crown of thorns, carrying this cross. And I looked on his face and I just saw this serene, totally decisive face, that expression that he didn't care what was happening around him. He wasn't worried or upset or afraid or angry or anything. He was just determined to get to the place of his own death. And I thought at the moment, this is God at work. Like, this is divine. No mere man could live like that and love, like just move full forward to his own death. Like, I just thought, this is God, and it just made that kind of impact.
That's powerful, and that was
Yeah.
just the picture of the passion and death and suffering. Something we all will experience is our death. And he faced it like a man, and as you say, like a God, it seems. So the next question after that is the resurrection. So after this brief break, please rejoin us, and we'll talk about the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. Good morning and welcome back. We're talking with Father John Boettcher about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. A teaching that is central to the Catholic faith, and I'll check with Father Boettcher on this, but I believe always has been from the very beginning of the writing of the Catholic doctrines. I believe St. Paul, in his early letter, I'm not sure which one it was, letter to the Corinthians, says, if Jesus did not rise from the dead, our faith is in vain, and it's a lie. It's not true. So we need to know, we need to believe that this is a historical fact that Jesus did rise from the dead. Paul seemed to. And what can you tell us about that?
Well, there's a number of angles to approach the question. One of them is the physical evidence that remains of the passion itself to show he did die, and then the resurrection. And so obviously the fact we just have an empty tomb, we believe the body's in heaven, the body was risen, made spiritual, but actually corporal, so touchable, like tactile. But at the same time, we're like on earth, well, we can't point towards a body, in the sense of bones and what remains. And in a sense, for Catholics, that's already evidence, because you think about all the saints, we have some piece of their body, usually.
Relics.
Yeah, relics,
saints.
So we're into relics. They say the fact we don't have a relic for Jesus or the Virgin Mary, anything like bone and, body, says something else already. Like, well, if it were all production or a fantasy or a invention, well, they would have invented relics. They would have said, okay, we got them, we're here, But more seriously, if we look at the Shroud of Turin, for example, that's been an intense focus of study from all kinds of angles, scientific, in the last few decades. The results of that are extremely intriguing, if not convincing. For a number of the people on the team, it was convincing enough to convert to the Catholic faith.
Is that right?
But to anyone who has any interest at all, they're intriguing, because there's so many powerful signs that point in pretty much the same direction, and then there's some strong signs that seem to point otherwise.
All right.
Like one of the later radiocarbon datings was that it was from 1350 something.
Okay.
So there's all kinds of conflicting evidence. But, the scientific approach is to look at all the evidence and include it in any viable theory. You can't just say, well, we're not going to pay attention to that and we'll come up with a theory that ignores the data. A scientist has to deal with all the relevant data and come up with a theory that explains all of it, or it's not a confirmed theory,
yes.
Right? And so far that hasn't happened for any of the sides to exploit all the data convincingly. So we're kind of in the middle of, which is, to me, that's the state of science. It's a beautiful thing, I think, to intrigue and get people passionate about the argument, whether for or against, and work it out. And that's what's happening.
And then there's philosophical questions too, or at least historical, philosophical, a sort of combination of things. One hears that it's a myth that was invented later, but this teaching was clear from the very beginning of Christianity, yes?
Yeah, and so if you look at the early sources like Luke, in his Acts of the Apostles and describing, well, first the Gospel and then into the Acts, he's describing the events that unfold and naming historical names and territories that looks pretty bona fide historical narrative, right? And for the times, that people take seriously just as much as Josephus. Obviously with a spin, just like Josephus, but something to be taken seriously and not as a novel. The whole genre of other Gospels, like Gospel of Thomas and Peter and all that came in the mid-2nd century are evidence of, there was that genre around and multiplied, but we're talking about a whole different genre of ancient texts. And some of it very early, 36 AD, is the historical point of Luke's focus, and then 1 Corinthians, 52, early stuff,
So let's be clear about that. Paul's epistle was written in the 50s, between 50 and 60. Luke was writing at the same time, so witnesses were still around. So then that leads to, I've read this objection, oh no, it was an invention, some kind of conspiracy among the early followers to what? To persuade the world?
Right. The difficulty then shifts to, is it credible that a group of people that were among the most intensive about the commandment not to bear false witness, would they have all decided to bear false witness together and basically be hypocritical liars? So, of course, that would be possible, but I don't think that's a credible argument, because they had a very strict level of ethics, which says don't tell lies and don't tell half-truths even, and be willing to lay down your life for the truth. So the martyrs who did die for saying the truth and could have easily gotten out with simply being quiet in the face of contrary statements, they felt the need to say the truth and be killed for it. So, there's that kind of apologetic force, not to accept that as a credible way.
I think that's an accurate recounting of the early history, that yes, no one recanted Jesus' resurrection. People died espousing it. And there's also, I think, I don't know if all the viewers are aware, but after the resurrection, there's a pretty healthy post-resurrection narrative in the scriptures, in the Acts of the Apostles and even in the Gospels, about what Jesus did. Mm-hmm. He was present to his friends, so they recount his works and his appearances at the time, and they recount their own weakness and doubt. I think literarily, it's very impressive to me. Scripturally, I'm no expert, so you tell me, that rings true?
Yeah, definitely. There's some early church apologetics on that basis. These people were also included self-criticism.
Yeah.
Sometimes they look really bad, like Peter. He says, no, keep that in there. I want everybody to know I failed. I fell on my face.
And more than one thing I've read points out this, that the first witnesses to the resurrection as told in the Gospels were women, and that women had a social status that didn't allow their word to be taken too seriously.
Right.
Am I right about that?
Yeah,
Okay.
so they did.
Let's take another brief break now, and we'll return with Father John Boettcher and talk about the resurrection. Hello and welcome back. We're talking with Father John Boettcher about the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. Fascinating historical discussion in many different angles. So I think we've established that it has been a Christian doctrine from the beginning, and there are efforts to debunk or resist it, but what do we get from it? What is important about it? Why does it have a central place in our religious life?
Good question. I'd say one thing is that since it's a tangible reality, at first, when Luke's gospel, they see Jesus risen and they think it's a ghost, and they get panicked, right? And Jesus says, like, calm down, like, got anything to eat? And they're like, yeah. So he eats a piece of fish and some honey, and they're like, well, ghosts don't do that. Like, you must be okay. Like, we're okay. Like, you know, it's something tangible. They handed him a piece of fish, they touched it, and then he ate it, and they're like, okay, that demonstrates, you know, a real human bodily presence. And I believe that's what's so important, is that it's our bodies of focus and the way we have passions. They were afraid. You look in the resurrection accounts, you see emotion there, passion,
yes,
fear, joy, amazement coming out in a way that in most of the gospel it's not there really. There's actions among the apostles, but rarely that kind of emotional intensity.
So, the resurrection, yes, if God became man and took on human form, then he suffers a human death, but overcomes it in this way that I strictly find unimaginable. I can't imagine what his risen body was. Is this settled in the church doctrine? Do we know?
No, it's very mysterious. The qualities are you can go through walls, you know, he just appears all of a sudden, and yet it's still a tangible body. So it does throw us off. Like the qualities, it wouldn't fit like the normal myth or whatever, you know, like the rules for how he can do whatever he's doing.
And it's a display of God's power, I take it, but as you point out, displayed rather modestly. Mm-hmm. He comes, he goes, he knows his followers, what will appeal to them, he talks to them. Not doing anything, I would say, spectacular that's recorded in the Gospels.
Oh, nothing like he did during his life even. He didn't apparently heal anyone or work any miracles after the resurrection.
Yeah.
It's just being with his disciples and convincing him he's really there and really alive. And, yeah.
And let me ask you about this, because I heard that you played Christ in the Passion play up in Lake County. That's an interesting angle to try to embody that personage.
Yeah, it was a great privilege and an amazing experience. I had just come back from a pilgrimage in Israel. I'd been there for 5 weeks and just living, walking and sleeping where Jesus had walked and slept. And then I'd gone to the Oberammergau Passion Play.
In Germany, yeah?
In Germany,
okay.
yeah. Outdoor, huge, beautiful dramatic production. And then I've been asked to be in the role of Christ in the Lake County Passion Play, which is every May, third Sunday. In the open, there's about 200 members in the cast, and there's people on horseback, there's flocks of goats.
Okay,
and,
yeah.
You know, it's big. And,
sounds good.
And in that play, just that amazing inside view of Christ with his sufferings, with his carrying a cross. I insisted on making a full-size, fully solid 4x12 cross.
Is that right?
Weighed 110 pounds.
Okay.
And you could feel it. I didn't have to fake that it was heavy. It was really heavy. And with that experience of the sufferings, but then the grace of the resurrection and coming over the hill, risen, you know, white, just seeing kind of the shockwave of awe go through the whole audience. I was like, this is like the real thing, you know, like the impact the risen Christ had and the joy that was there. And so it started me thinking about, you know, the the reason why did Jesus have to come back like that? Why did he
Yes,
show us?
yes.
And it's for that full, convincing human relationship of the body embrace, you know? Like, there's a certain beautiful point in the play where I'd go down to my mom, Mary, give her a bit, beautiful abrazo, and the second time, hug. And it's like that, okay, this is my son, I know him. And it was a beautiful moment, just very emotional and affirmative,
Yeah.
And if you look at the disciples, before that, they're scared and they're hiding in their upper room. After they encounter Jesus risen, they're ready to dive, like go out to the ends of the world. And they have that intense zeal, which wasn't happening before. The bodily presence of Christ could affirm them, and they were so convinced beyond a shadow of doubt, because they've been with him 40 days like that. Okay, now they're ready to roll.
Now let me ask this one. You work with young people. You're a chaplain at a state college, state university. Are they interested in this? Do they find the resurrection a more difficult doctrine than you might expect, or less?
I think it's a challenge, definitely, because it's easy to believe he suffered and died. That's pretty much a historical point. But the risen part, yeah, and I believe there's a great movement among the young people now to meditate on, or to be in the presence of what we call the Blessed Sacrament, the host that we consecrate during the Mass, which we believe is the body, although mystically so, body of Christ. It doesn't look like it, but we believe that is really him, and it's tactile. And so that sense of a physical, real presence that also has a spiritual power to it, that's very intriguing for the young adults of today. Like that, it provides a lot of gusto.
I do hear about this, and our youth minister arranges these adoration sessions and so on, and I do think it's also not only meditative but silent and deeply plumbing for people to get away from the digital world and be alone with God. So, Father, I want to thank you for being with us today. We have a minute left, so I'd like to ask you, what's the one or two things that a viewer should take away from this discussion?
I'd say one is it's an intriguing mystery, and it's worth all the attention we give it. Like, it is a real question, whether you're a believer or not. There's some data out there, the Shroud of Turin, the empty tomb, Christian tradition, and also what we claim to be so is that Jesus is with us now, and there are physical manifestations of healings. That's the very same things that Jesus used to do. I guess also just to realize the passion of that event. It's where we have such joy and such strength and ability to commiserate, because we have this joyful sustenance inside too. So it's a very passionate thing. I say, like, let your passions loose, like get curious and
thank you,
and go for it.
Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us on this special Easter-themed presentation about the resurrection of Jesus Christ.